Okay, well, this first section of the course is called the Ethics of Social Roles. Now, in a way, it's an obvious point. If you take ethics in the context of most of your introductory philosophy courses or in some other context, you look very broadly at the kinds of obligations we all have to each other, things that are good traits of character in general, and so forth. And last time, we were characterizing ethics in terms of three basic questions. First question, what to be? That is to say, what kind of person should I be? The second sort of question, what to do? Are there things I ought to be doing? Are there things that I shouldn't be doing? And the final question is the question of why, really? How to decide what I'm to be and do. Now today we're going to be talking about Confucius's approach to these problems. And it seems to me he's an important place to start, partly because he does clearly differentiate these questions, partly because he gives us some kind of reply to all of them, and he emphasizes that ethics does depend on social roles in a way that almost no one in the Western tradition does. A few people, F.H. Bradley and some others in the late 19th and early 20th century did. But otherwise it hasn't been a major focus of concern. So, if we look at Confucius's theory, we identify, first of all, a number of key concepts. The first, maybe the primary one, is the concept of ren. It's often translated as benevolence, or sometimes just virtue, sometimes even perfect virtue. But it's the answer to this question, what to be. Be a person of ren, okay? Virtue, benevolence. We're going to talk a lot about what exactly is involved in this, but it is something, I apologize for the placement of the seats, guys, it's ridiculous. But anyway, benevolence is really a question of having a certain attitude, and it's going to lead to certain kinds of behavior. So, if we are the kinds of people we ought to be, then we will in general do the kinds of things we ought to do. We're going to know how to decide. What do we do? Well, here, he's got another key concept, the concept of propriety, or li. Propriety here means something like proper behavior, appropriate behavior. It's broader than our own ethical sense. And it's, I think, important in the context of organizational ethics to think about that way. Because consider the ways in which you ought to behave as part of an organization. Okay? A member of a team, a member of a musical group, a member of a class, an employee, etc. There are all sorts of rules, some of them written, many of them unwritten, about what you do and what you don't do. For example, there are clearly unethical things you could do in this classroom. Okay, I hope you don't do them. I used to challenge people and say, give me some examples, and probably a bad idea. However, there are all sorts of inappropriate things you can do that are not really, strictly speaking, unethical, but would be inappropriate, right? That is to say, inappropriate given this social context, given that we are such a group. So, what are some examples of things like that? I take it if somebody here starts committing murders in the classroom, okay, clearly unethical. That's more than just inappropriate. I'm going to respond in ways that involve panic and screaming and not involve, I'm sorry, that's improper behavior. But there are lots of things short. So what are some examples of this kind of inappropriate, even if not exactly immoral behavior? Yeah?
If I ask you a question about physics?
Good, you asked me a question about physics. You suddenly say, hey, I've got a question for you, Professor Bonneback. I'm taking this intro physics course, and I don't really understand what a Lorentz transformation is. Can you explain to me a Lorentz transformation? In a physics class, perfectly appropriate question, but in an organizational ethics class, not an appropriate question, okay? So yeah, that's a good example. Are there others? Yeah.
Well, there's not technically a dress code here, but
Okay, good. Yes, there's not technically a dress code, but there are ways of dressing inappropriately, right? And a lot of businesses, there's a very strong dress code. Sometimes it's officially spelled out, but sometimes it's not. And it's only when people start behaving inappropriately that somebody says, hey, you got to control it. At least at UT here, it seems to me it's very rare to see people who are dressed inappropriately. On the other hand, a few years ago, there was a guy at Berkeley who went through his entire 4 years at Berkeley naked. Okay, he was called the Naked Guy. And I think he wore sandals, but otherwise he just... Now, yeah, I'm sorry. No, you're not supposed to do that. It's not, I mean, I don't think it's immoral exactly. It's just like, that's weird, right? No, that's inappropriate. And similarly, it could go the other way. Suppose I came in every time dressed as medieval philosophers would have dressed. I wear my PhD robes, which are these medieval things, and I just wear that. Now at Oxford, people actually do that. But here at UT, that would seem weird, right? It would seem inappropriate. There are things that are appropriate in a given context. And what the context is crucial to determining what's appropriate and inappropriate. It's presumably inappropriate to go around murdering people, no matter what the social context. It's not like you can say, well, I'm in Texas, so it's fine. But propriety does matter a lot. There are things that it's perfectly fine to do in a classroom that would be inappropriate to do in the middle of a restaurant, for example. Like here, you can ask a question. I hope you don't, in the middle of a restaurant, just stand up and ask a question. Right? What do you all think about, Confucius's theory of random? Anyway, there are things that really depend critically on context, and this includes. Now, the last thing, how to decide. Here, Confucius talks about righteousness. His term in Chinese is yi, and it is usually translated as righteousness or justice. Thank you, another example of behavior. But yeah, this is something that has to do with, doing the right thing for the right reason, because it's right. He often contrasts this with gain. The superior person, he says, thinks of righteousness. And the superior person, that's his phrase for just in general, the person who's getting all of this right. The term in Chinese actually originally meant son of a ruler. It's roughly noble. Okay, but by Confucius's time, it is not tied to social rank. It's not tied to that sort of aristocracy or anything. It's really just a question of upstanding behavior. Sometimes Victorians, when they translated Confucius, would translate it as gentleman or something like that, which has a bit of that social class echo in English. But I don't think that's what this is really about. This is about being the kind of person you want to be in general. And that does involve having a certain kind of character, doing what you want to do, deciding according to the right criteria. Okay, well, let's take a look at the analytics, because I think something really vital ethically emerges as soon as we do. So the very first one, and by the way, notice, a lot of great texts that found philosophical and religious traditions start with a big drum, right? In the beginning, God created heaven and the earth. Or Aristotle's metaphysics, everyone by nature desires to know. Here we get, the master said, the master being Confucius, isn't it pleasant to learn and apply what you learn? Isn't it delightful to have friends coming from far away? Isn't he a person of complete virtue who doesn't get angry that others don't appreciate him? Now, that feels like well, yeah, sure, but that doesn't seem like philosophy, right? Much less, let's found a religion on that. So, what's going on here? Okay, isn't it pleasant to learn? Isn't it great to have friends coming from far away? And isn't it good not to get upset when others don't recognize, really, when others don't appreciate you? So what's happening there?
Very stoic response.
Oh, it is stoic, that's right. I mean, you appreciate the good thing, you don't get upset about the bad thing. And that's sort of, I think that's right to call it a stoic theme. That continues throughout the Analects. He says the superior person is free of anxieties, free of perplexities, in much the way that the Stoics talk about tranquility or peace of mind as the goal. And so this is somebody who will ultimately exhibit peace of mind. On the other hand, it's not as if, our goal is peace of mind, so it's a question of how to get there. It's rather a byproduct of this, or maybe a sign of this. Think about this, learning. Where does learning happen? I don't mean physically where it happens, but yeah.
Well, to me, it says like introspection.
Good, it happens inside here, right? Learning is a matter of having something about your mental state change. It's internal. It's something that has to do with you. And throughout the analects, it turns out that a lot of, in fact, in a way, the most fundamental ethical questions have to do with that. They really apply to you. And so we start really with this conception. The conception of the self, we might say, and say, look, in the end, well, here, in the very beginning, the first thing, isn't it great to learn and apply what you've learned? So we think, yes, it has to do with something internal to me. That's really where ethics starts. That's fundamental. And we find out something really critical about it, something that emerges in the Great Learning. And if you read that part, you realize it's just like one half of one page. That's not an excerpt from the Great Learning. That is the whole text. Okay, that's it. But what is the most fundamental thing there? What is the rock bottom? Societies depend on families. Families depend on people. People depend on getting themselves right internally. What does that depend on? In the end, knowledge, the investigation of things. So it's really learning that is fundamental to this. But as we'll see, there's a lot of other stuff too. Now the second thing there, isn't it delightful to have friends coming from far? Suppose I tell you, somebody you've never met before is coming to Austin. I say, hey, later this term, Martha Nussbaum is coming to Austin. And maybe you know who that is. You think, well, that's exciting. But probably you don't. And you're thinking, well, big deal, right? But if I say, hey, your best friend is coming to high school, or not, is coming from high school, is coming here, then you're going to say, oh, that's a big deal. So there is this sphere consisting of our friends, and also our family members. And notice those are the people closest to us. It's not just that they spark reactions in us that other people don't spark. We have special obligations to them. So, for example, you have obligations to your parents that you don't have to just strangers on the streets. They have obligations to you they don't have to just strangers. What are some of those obligations? Think about what you owe your parents that you don't just owe the average stranger.
Yeah, I have to remember a stranger's birthday.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, it's bad, right, if you forget your mother's birthday, your father's birthday. But on the other hand, if somebody walks up to you in the street you've never seen before and just says, hey, today's my birthday, why don't you wish me happy birthday? That's completely inappropriate, right? You have no obligation to do that. What about brothers and sisters? Do you have obligations to your brothers and sisters that you don't have to the average person?
Paying attention to what's going on in their lives and like asking them questions and that like interest.
Okay, good. Yeah, paying some attention to what's happening with them, asking them questions, talking to them, and so on. The birthday thing wouldn't hurt either. But yeah, sure, there are all sorts of things. What about your parents and their obligations to you?
Financial.
Yeah, okay, yeah, here you are in college, so financial is a big one. But presumably, you know, more than just that. If your parents just said, hey, I'll pay your tuition, but otherwise, goodbye, I don't want to ever hear from you again. That would be to fail their obligations too. So there are those things. But now we move to the third sphere. Isn't he a person of complete virtue who doesn't get angry that others don't appreciate him? And so we have this sphere on the outside of all of this, of just other people. Okay, strangers, mere acquaintances, people we aren't close to. Maybe you know their name, often you don't know their name. They don't, some translations say don't recognize you, but you know, if we're talking about strangers, we don't want to literally recognize. It means recognize your strengths, recognize, in other words, appreciate you, understand you, and so on. We don't expect that of strangers, and so we shouldn't be concerned about that. Okay, let's take a look at the second verse in the Analects. You said, and by the way, you and Zheng and a number of these other interlocutors, Zikong and so on, they're students of Confucius. At his height, he had something like 3,000 students. And so, yeah, I've taught some big classes at this university, but never 3,000. I did have 1,200 one term, but not all in one class. But anyway, I think, yeah, the largest individual class I've ever done is 500. Anyway, I don't know how you managed to teach 3,000 people, but here's the idea. He is saying, he's discussing these things with all people. The Analects are not things Confucius himself is writing, they're things his students write down. And so here somebody is recording, in effect, a discussion. Yu is talking to Confucius, presumably, and Yu says, few filial and fraternal people like to offend their superiors. And nobody who doesn't like to offend superiors likes to strike rebellion. The superior person attends to the root of things. That's one of the most important lines in the end. You have to understand what depends on what. And so we have to get to the root of things. Some things are fundamental. And indeed, that's what the great learning is all about. The state of society in general, it depends in the end on the individual person. Well, okay, we have to understand what depends on what. From the root grows the way. Here's another important concept. If these things together add up to give us the superior person, then we might say the question of what to do overall, and the question of maybe all of these together give us the way. The Chinese term is Tao. But the way here, the path, is really just the right way to live, okay? And that includes the right character to have, the right way to act, the right way to think about action. Okay, so all of that comes from the root. It depends on something, but what does it depend on? Now we get the answer. Filial piety and fraternal submission, or the root of benevolence. So in short, having the right kind of character, being what you ought to be, that depends on these two things. Filial piety and fraternal submission. Now, what are they? Well, we were just talking about obligations to friends and family members you don't have to obligate. Filial piety, the piety of sons and daughters. Okay? So it has to do with the relationship between you and your elders. Within the family, but then it gets generalized to things more broad. So, one way I like to depict it is to say there are certain vertical obligations between elders and the younger, between superiors and inferiors in an organization. Okay? And getting that right is a question of filial piety. Piety is an old-fashioned term in English, by the way, and I realize it sounds weird to us. It's not an ideal translation. But I don't know if we have a good term for being a good son or daughter, a good parent, because it does go both directions in this hierarchy. It involves being respectful, but anyway, we don't really have a good word, which is why it's sort of unfortunate to use that old-fashioned term, but I don't have anything better. So let's think about what that involves. We're going to talk much more about that next week when we think of this as one of the fundamental patterns of relationships that exist all over the world. But roughly speaking, what are your obligations to your parents? Besides remembering their birthdays.
Take care of them in their age.
Ooh, taking care of them when they're elderly? Yes. Yeah, I'm getting close to the house. What else?
Continuing the family business if you have one.
Yeah, could be. I mean, yeah, your parents are running a business. They want you to help out in the business. That might be something you have to do, or at least ought to do. What are some other things? Yeah.
Expressions of empathy, just kind of generally.
Okay, expressions of empathy. You care what's going on with them. Yeah.
Obedience, like if they tell you not to go out and party, don't.
Okay, good. Yeah, good. Obedience. Yeah, Confucius thinks, well, obedience is the number one thing. Now, whenever I ask students this question, that's not the number one thing on their list. But understandably, because you're of a certain age where you're becoming independent and obedience is not the main thing for you. However, imagine that this relationship is between a parent and a 2-year-old, and you might say, oh, well, now I get it, yeah. If the parent says, don't touch that hot stove, obedience is really important. Yeah.
Just not squandering their raising of you. So if they're paying for some of your college, you study, if they've taught you to do certain things or not to do certain things, you tend to try to follow them.
Good.
Don't go off the rails.
Yeah, it's not as if you really have to live exactly the way your parents want you to live, but to go so far contrary to their values is something that you might think is somehow failing to fulfill some obligation or responsibility to them. Yeah, okay, there are lots of people here, I'm sorry, you.
Yes, and also not just the actions, but like doing it by the right hearts.
Doing it on the right part, okay, good. You know, there's one way, hey Mom, it's your birthday. I got you this present. You want it? I mean, you're doing the thing, but right, that's not what the right attitude. So you're absolutely right. You have to be doing the right thing, but for the right reason and with the right sort of attitude. You have to do it, as Aristotle's going to later say, as a virtuous person would do it. And that's going to mean not begrudgingly, but with the right internal spirit. In fact, in general, we were talking about what depends on what. The virtues of action, he says, are really something, I guess I'm doing this in the reverse order from the root metaphor, but they stem from virtues of feeling. And that stems from virtues of thinking, thought. So it is important to do the right thing, but it's also important to have the right set of feelings about things. And it's important, in order to do that, to think about things in the right way. Hence this idea that learning is really fundamental. If you're not thinking about things in the right way, you're going to mess up. When he talks about government, he says, to govern is to rectify. In Chinese, that's a pun, because they both are pronounced, well, pronunciation is terrible, but they're both basically chain. And so it really is a chain, this chain, okay? But the idea is governing is rectifying, and the most important part of that is rectifying names, calling things by what they ought to be called. In other words, thinking about things according to the right categories. If you do that, you're going to feel about things in the right way. And if you feel about things in the right way, you're going to generally behave in the right way. So you pointed out something additional, which is not only is this important to developing right action, but also it better be done out of the right sort of feeling. If it's done with the wrong sort of feeling or the wrong sort of thought, that's not really to be a superior person either. Okay, well let's think about then obligations that are horizontal. Brother and sister, or friends typically, or what else? Co-workers within an organization, or maybe fellow members of a club, fellow members of a class. What are your obligations? Let's start there actually. What are your obligations to other members of this class that you don't have, let's say, just average people? And they're separate from obligations to me. Do you have any? Yeah.
Be conscientious of other people, try not to distract them, try to be respectful.
Okay, good. Being respectful, not trying to distract them. There are ways of behaving that would be, well, both inappropriate, and talking about propriety, but also would be violating that sort of obligation. I mean, suppose you are, I don't know, UT has a great baseball team. Suppose you are trying to become the third base coach. And so all the way through class, sitting around in a circle like this, you're going, whatever, third base, all these ridiculous motions, right? So the rest of us are going to look, oh man, well, you know what, it's going to be very distracting. That's something that's violating some obligation you have here. It's not unethical for a third base coach to do that, it's fine. But on the other hand, it's not something that, you know, makes any sense out of that context, and in fact would seem bad outside of that context. Are there other obligations we have that are horizontal toward our peers that way? Yeah.
Having like civilized discussions if they don't agree with you, like actually respecting what they have to say.
Good, respecting what they have to say. If they disagree with you, you know, not being concerned about that. Not being worried if they don't appreciate you either, if they don't appreciate your point of view. That's something that, yeah, if we think about this sort of pattern in general, among friends, for example, it does involve a certain amount of not only concern and respect for the other person, but tolerance of differences. If somebody is playing music at a time you really would like it to be quiet to study, and let's say it's your roommate, and you're pretty good friends, then you say, listen, that's bothering me. And the roommate Now, here's why he calls it fraternal submission. The roommate will turn the music down or turn it off out of respect for you. Or similarly, you might think this is kind of annoying, but I'll put up with it because I respect and submit to my roommate. Now, you can take this too far. All this is to be done according to rules of propriety. So if you're thinking, oh, this is driving me crazy, but I can't say anything, I must submit to my roommate's wishes. And your roommate's saying, you know, gosh, if I had known, I would have turned it off and stuff. You can be so submissive to one another that nothing happens. Like the two people who meet at the doorway. It's like, you first. Oh no, you first. No, I insist you, etc. Nobody goes through. So we have to do this appropriately. But nevertheless, it's basically being respectful and yielding to the other person to some degree. Okay, now, lots of people in the world, most people in the world, are not us. They're not our friends, they're not our family members, they're not coworkers or bosses or fellow team members or anything like that. So, what are our obligations to them? Yeah?
Question real quick, is the horizontal relationship still called filial piety?
Oh, I'm sorry, I said it, but I didn't write that. Fraternal submission. Fraternal from the Latin word for brother or sibling, and it really just refers to that attitude of respect and yielding to people who are your peers. And then toward others. Now here it's interesting because throughout Confucius is talking about the rules of propriety, the rules of appropriate behavior. But there's no sense that for the most part we can write these down. In fact, you get the sense that these can easily come to conflict. And so it requires, a superior person, it requires good judgment and thinking about what the right thing to do in this situation is. But there is, he says, one rule that applies to all social relationships, all the time. And what is that one rule? He calls it reciprocity. So, what is reciprocity? The word is sometimes translated as altruism or likening to oneself.
The golden rule.
It's almost the golden rule. What is the golden rule? It says, treat others as you would like to be treated. This is the negative version of that. Don't treat others the way you wouldn't like to be treated. Okay, so it's very close. Sometimes people call it the silver rule to distinguish it from the golden rule because it's almost there. But anyway, yeah, don't do to others what you wouldn't want done to you. Now, how is that different from the golden rule? The golden rule is positive. Treat others as you'd like to be treated. This says, well, don't treat others the way you wouldn't like to be treated. Seems like that follows from the golden rule.
Safer.
It's a little safer.
This one's not necessarily saying be positive, it's just saying don't be negative.
That's right, exactly. So it's not really imposing positive obligations on you. It is imposing, you're right, purely negative obligations, saying, look, don't do what you wouldn't want done to you, to other people. And so it's really creating certain boundaries, if you want to think of it that way, saying, don't do this kind of thing. Yeah.
I do think sometimes there is like positive obligations. Like if you see like a random stranger like really hurt or something, you're like, oh, I don't have to do anything. Like that's not.
Okay, good. That's right. So you might think, wait a minute, what about this stranger? There are all sorts of psychological experiments that put people in positions where somebody clearly needs help around them. And they look at who helps and how many people help and so on. And often this is pretty shocking. One of these that I've seen took place at a university. Because some of the early ones just take place on a street in New York City or something. And there's some guy who's just slumped over and lying on the steps of some building. Well, it's New York City. I mean, first of all, that's not that unusual. Secondly, it's like, yeah, I don't know what's going on here, but it's not clear that that person needs medical help. But imagine that when you leave class, you walk out, and there in the middle of Wagner Hall is this person who's just sprawled out on the floor. Maybe you even see them fall. You see the person kind of go, and there they are, lying on the floor. What do? Well, it turns out most people do nothing, they just walk on by. Okay? Now, interestingly, if you're alone in the hallway, you're highly inclined to stop and try to find out whether the person's okay. If there are lots of people around, though, you don't. You basically think somebody else will do it. If you're happy, if I've just, for example, given homeworks back and you got an A, then you're likely to be in a good mood and actually have these pro-social attitudes and help. But if nothing like that happened, or I gave you a bad grade, you might go out there, I feel like you do, dude. So in short, we don't do a great job of it. But now you're right, we do have those positive obligations to help others in need. Now there's a limit to that. Confucius is at one point is asked, so the superior person, if somebody falls into a well, he'll go down in after him, I suppose. Confucius says, well, no, look, you can expect a lot of the superior person, but he's not going to make a fool of himself. The idea is, he's going to try to help the person out of the well. He's not going to jump back down in the well to, basically commiserate with the person down there. And so, there is something positive. Now, the question that I think here is crucial is, can we draw something positive out of this in some way? Or is that an additional thing? That is to say, this is one rule that applies to everyone, but he doesn't say it by any means. That's the only rule that applies to other people in general. So what else applies in that way? Let's just, maybe we can get something out of this. We wouldn't want other people to just pass by and neglect our troubles when we're in need. So maybe we can cover that case with this, because we can realize, wait a minute, don't do to others. Passing by is, in a sense, doing that. By the way, it makes a huge difference whether the person looks at you. If they're just down there with their eyes closed, most people pass them by. But if they make eye contact, you're highly likely to stop. So if you're ever in that position and you need help, look at people, okay, make eye contact. Now, that suggests, well, yeah, maybe there are additional principles out here. One of them has to do with justice and injury. So here we're talking about people in general, but we've got special cases. First of all, we've already mentioned people in need. What about them? But also, what about people who have committed some injustice, have injured us in some way? How do we respond to that? A classic case, somebody hits you. What do you do? Maybe you're in a bar, just having a drink. Keep mind your own business. Somebody comes over, starts picking a fight with you. Okay, pushes you around, punches you. What do you do?
Now that they hear everything.
Yeah, you're out loud thinking, what, me in a bar? Are you kidding? But, yeah, we can think about the various attitudes, right? Sort of primitive attitude in many ancient codes is eye for an eye, okay? You respond with the same kind of thing. They punch you, punch them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, then there's the sermon on the mount attitude. Okay, you turn the other cheek. You only hit the one, fella. Come back. Well, I don't think that's exactly what it means, but I'm joking.
No, it's an intimidation tactic. Say, no, hit me again. It's like, oh man, this guy's nuts.
Right. Yeah, actually, yeah, well, it's interesting, even in that biblical account, I mean, Jesus is saying, respond to injury with kindness, and it will heap flaming coals upon your head. You'll bring shame on your enemy in this way. It's not really saying just forgive and forget. It's more like, hey, you really want to get them good? Don't punch them. Make everybody else think they're terrible for punching you. So anyway, there's this double edge to that biblical passage. But anyway, putting that aside, Confucius says, look, because the question is, should I respond to injury with kindness? Should I, in effect, turn the other cheek? Confucius says, look, if you're going to respond to injury with kindness, how will you respond to kindness? Respond to kindness with kindness, and injury with, not injury, justice. Okay? So, seek justice, in short. Okay? Respond to injury with justice. Not, notice, that's not really covered by this. I think that's an additional principle. So we seek justice in response. that. In effect, I mean, not always, but call the police, okay? Report this, something like that. Don't take it into your own hands. But of course, it doesn't just mean seek some institutional answer. It also can mean, well, try to set things right. And sometimes that might involve one thing, sometimes another. It's interesting, in the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu has a sort of response to this and criticizes many aspects of Confucianism, but this is one that's singled out there. His solution is to respond to injustice with what he calls de. That is to say, with your own individual virtue, in other words, with a spontaneous reaction. What's your spontaneous response? Is it to punch back? Is it to run away? Is it to just leave the situation? Is it to turn the other cheek? Is it to call the police? Trust your instinct, Lao Tzu says. And that may involve seeking justice. It may involve just running away and forgetting about it. It may involve all sorts of things. Roughly speaking, the idea there is, look, millions of years of evolution have led you to these spontaneous responses. Trust them over any theory you might have about how to respond. And that's a response we're going to look at later when we look at intuitionist models of moral thinking. They roughly say you already have moral intuitions about what's right and wrong, about what to do and what not to do. Luke, trust your feelings. Okay? They are the product of really the collective wisdom of generations. And through evolutionary processes, but in other ways to acculturation. It's like, look, all of that, the genetic, the environmental heritage you have, that's probably more trustworthy than your own individual ideas. So trust that. Anyway, I'm not saying that's not Confucius's view, to be clear, but it is the Taoist view, and it is a view that we're going to encounter later in the course. Okay, well, in need, we haven't really said exactly what to say here, except that there are analogs to fraternal submission and filial piety at this level too. The core of these things is here with our friends and family. That's where we learn how to behave. And so Confucius says, as Aristotle does as well later, it's important to be brought up in the right way. It's all much harder to be a superior person if you haven't been. Because you've got to figure out within what's right behavior and wrong behavior, what's appropriate and inappropriate, within the context of those closest to you. And if you figured it out there, it's kind of easy to extend it to other people. But if you haven't figured it out there, it's hard, okay? That's why these are the roots, and you need to kind of get that straight. Which is why at one point he says, have no friends not equal to yourself. Make sure you're around people who are promoting the right things in you. To be around people who are going to be leading you astray is a bad thing. Try to put yourself in a positive setting that turns you into a superior person. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, actually. I like myself around certain people a lot better than I like myself around other people. I kind of feel like this person is bringing out the best of you. This person is kind of bringing out the worst of you. And he's basically saying, find the people who bring out the best in you. Try to hang out with those people. Because some people are really going to help you be the person you should be, and other people aren't. We have a program here called First Year Groups. They used to be called Freshman Interest Groups. And the advisors refer to the people in them as figlets. But anyway, usually those are support groups that really help people. They do better. But I have once had a group of figlets who just encouraged each other's bad behavior. I mean, normally you look at these groups and you think, yeah, they did well over the class average. This group, almost everybody got D's and F's. And it was like, there were a few bad apples, and they affect the other apples in this little group, to the point where by the end, none of them were doing anything good, and it was just a total mess. And so that can happen too. I mean, be around the people who are going to bring out the best of you. That's important. So, how does this affect us? Well, when we think about people in need, we think, well, at least temporarily, you're in this kind of hierarchical relationship. That is to say, they're in trouble, and you're in a position. It's not exactly that you're older than they are or anything like that, but on the other hand, you are in a superior position just by being in a position to help. And so, of course, you don't have the same obligations to a stranger that you would have to a friend or a family member, but you still have some analogs to this, right? And so there is still some obligation of care for other people. And it doesn't mean try to find out the birthdays of everybody in this class and make sure to greet them on their birthday. But it does mean, look, if somebody's in trouble, try to help them. And that goes in both of the, that's sort of a going in this direction kind of obligation. But there might be other obligations like this. You're just in some random group of people, and somebody seems to know what to do. That kind of thing happens all the time, actually. People are in a stressful situation. Somebody takes a leadership role. And it's not that they have any official position, but they know how to respond. So anyway, that kind of thing can often emerge in groups of strangers pretty quickly. And so there are analogs to this and to that that are going to give us additional obligations. All right, so we've got the basic picture in Confucius down, I hope. Okay, there are these three elements. You've got to be what you want to be. That is to say, a person of rank. And that really does mean learning how to navigate these horizontal peer relationships and also these sorts of hierarchical relationships. It means having some idea how to treat people who are in no particular relation with you. And it has to do with having a certain character fundamentally within the self. Then it's a matter of doing what you ought to do, behaving according to propriety. And, of course, deciding in the right way, thinking about righteousness and justice, and not just what's in your own self-interest. But there are some elements that we don't yet have, and so I want to focus on those. One is the possibility of conflict, okay? What if my obligations to my friends conflict with my obligations to other people? What if my obligations to my friend conflict with my obligations to myself? In other words, these borders become places where it's very easy for conflicts to arise. So is there anything we can say about those conflicts? Here's the example Confucius gives. Your father has stolen a sheep. The Duke of Shek comes up to him and says, in my country, people are so righteous that a son who finds out that his father has stolen a sheep will testify against him. And Confucius says, in my country, people are different. The father conceals the misdeeds of the son, and the son conceals the misdeeds of the father. Virtue is to be found in this. Now, you might think, ooh, okay, so here we have a kind of conflict. You find out that your parent has committed some crime. It'd be kind of weird in these days to steal a sheep, but maybe, whatever. But anyhow, maybe you come home for spring break, and turns out your parents have this shiny new car. You think, wow, the car's awesome. How did you afford this? And you say, well, yeah, we were at the mall and somebody just left it unlocked. Left the keys in it. I guess they went in to retrieve some package. But hey, we just, drove home, scratched off that VIN number, changed the plates. We have a new Maserati. Now, what do? Okay? Do you conceal their misdeeds? Do you report them? The Duke is saying you report them. Okay? They've committed a crime. But Confucius says, no, you don't. Now, that kind of conflict between your obligations to friends and family and obligations to other people, that can happen all the time, not just in that context. I faced it a few years ago when my father-in-law began behaving, in my opinion, in a very unfortunate and aggressive way toward a neighbor. And it was like he wants me to take his side. Well, I'm sorry, this side is crazy. I'm not going to be his side. But, it was that sort of conflict. What do? I mean, he's my father-in-law. I'm supposed to be, at least I'm not very close, but, whatever. I'm sort of within the sphere. On the other hand, the neighbor's clearly right. So, what do? In any event, that's the kind of thing that we have to say something about here. Confucius, now, is it really always the case that friends and family win? That's what his example suggests. But is that always right? Yeah.
Wouldn't that fall underneath his version of like like what's the righteous way to act in this situation of like, am I in the right thought, in the right feelings, in the right action? Like, was my father correct in stealing the sheep? Were his reasons for like righteous, like to help the family, to keep us alive?
Ooh, okay, good. Yeah, if you think in terms of righteousness, you could say, well, okay, right. I need to understand why this has been done. So, Dad, why did you steal the sheep? Why did you steal the Maserati? And there might be purely morally contemptible reasons why, but there might be reasons that make it intelligible. In fact, if you think about the setup of Plato's Euthyphro, where the father in that case has similarly done something wrong and the son is prosecuting the father, but in this case it involves confining someone who he thinks committed a crime so that he can go get the authorities. Then he's delayed and doesn't make it back, and this person who's been confined dies. Then it seems like, wait, it's kind of ambiguous here, right? I mean, the father was not trying to kill this person, trying to do the right thing, but etc. It's morally complicated, whereas stealing the sheep, it probably wasn't morally complicated. Although maybe, hey, that guy stole one of my sheep, I'm just stealing one of his in return. Yeah.
Isn't that kind of where like good judgment comes in? Because it's kind of like an agency cost, which like occurs a lot in today's like in examples like the board of directors and like CEOs, and it's kind of a similar thing. I mean, not with stealing sheep, but like you said, that doesn't happen. So wouldn't that have have judgment and like impersonal, rational laws, or like guidelines if there's no official law system?
Wonderful. Yes. In fact, if there's a term, a broader term for this kind of issue that I like, it comes from Thomas Nagel, and he has a book called The View from Nowhere. And you might say, look, all of these things at this level, they involve what Nagel would call the view from nowhere. But when we're thinking about ourselves and friends and family, it's like they're our friends and family, right? My perspective is different from yours. I'm in a certain social network. I've got a certain social role with respect to all these people. And so this is what he calls the view from here. And you're right, in lots of political as well as moral issues, there's a contrast. We might say, well, wait, I should really adopt the same attitude toward human beings, no matter where they live or what their situation is. But look, no, I live here. This is my thing. And so those are two fundamentally different perspectives, and they often come to conflict. And so this doesn't tell us how to resolve them, but at least locates them. All right, we're out of time. Next week we'll look at modern versions from the point of view of psychology that implemented ethics and social rules.